Ladies and metalfish, welcome to In the Zone. And my guest today is CJ, a resident expert on dungeon dice monsters via the Dungeon Dice Dimension Discord. So check that out. First off, as normally how this goes, that I have a Titanic 10 questions. But we do have a preliminary question, and that is, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing fine myself. Excited to talk about Dungeon Dice Monsters. This is the game that a lot of people who enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh are fairly aware of to different degrees. Maybe they have a fever dream of it. Maybe they have more memories of it. I definitely remember playing it back when it came out around 2004 or so. My friend and I, we had the starter set, and that was just a ton of fun. Yeah, there's only so much you can do going back, but why don't you tell me a little about your experience with Dungeon Dice Monsters?
I mean, like you said, if you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh, you definitely can fall into being a fan of Dungeon Dice Monsters. It's been around for quite a long time, a bit longer than most people might think, and it got pretty popular. Definitely more in Japan. Picked up a little bit over here. I would say personally, I think it was an amazing addition to the realistic tabletop version of the games because it added a new element to Yu-Gi-Oh that was very different that could really define things for a lot of tabletop players. One of the best ways I could describe it would more likely be a more advanced version of chess, combined with if you could add it with elements of D&D, which are some very popular elements that a lot of people today still like to have in their games.
So this leads me to my first question. Like, what is the game Dungeon Dice Monsters? I know you said it's kind of like a D&D thing, but for those who are unaware, can you like elaborate on that a little bit further?
Like I said, I would put it more into like kind of like D&D just a little bit because of the aesthetic that it has combined with its gameplay. But basically, it is a turn-based tabletop game where each player can choose dice that are leveled between 1 through 4, each grouped into 3 dice per level. You roll out the dice trying to be able to summon a monster. Each dice level 1 through 4, they have these crests called summon crests, all noted with a star. There's more crest on the lower level dice compared to the high level dice to make the lower levels easier to summon. Level ones will have 4 summons on a die, and they each go down by 1 per level. So level twos will have 3, threes will have 2, and then 1 summon on a level 4. And when you roll 3 dice at one time from the selected level. You must get at least 2 out of the 3 to roll a summon crest in order to summon a monster. Then once you summon monsters, you place these pieces called Dungeon Pathway onto a 13 square by 19 square game board. And it builds out a dungeon path where you build a walkway across the game board to reach the other side or connect towards the dungeon path built by your opponent, which will be the area you move your monsters across to interact with your opponent's monsters and attack them. Inevitably, try to destroy all of their monsters first, or attack your opponent and take out their life points to win the game. And
For people who really prefer dice games over card games, it's kind of more for those types of people, especially if you kind of like the Takahashi aesthetic.
yeah, I would say, but at the same time, there's still a bit of aesthetic, even if you were more interested in card games too, because like Yu-Gi-Oh, follows that trend of having a monster card to be able to reflect on. It has a piece associated with it to use on the game board. It has effects that you can use similar to that of Yu-Gi-Oh to advance through your gameplay as well.
Okay, like yeah, there's definitely seems to be a lot revolving around the game. Not so much, a very basic. Like, seems to be a lot of intricacy in it. That said, with my second question here is like, what do you personally enjoy about Dungeon Dice Monsters?
I'd say my most enjoyable quality would just be how openly fair it is just for anyone playing to really succeed at it or just have a good time. Indifferent to how typical card game can be, where you could have an overwhelming advantage based on if you have better cards than your opponent for a deck. In this game, the dice element adds this luck based element to it. It gives anyone just a fair enough chance to either succeed or brick going throughout the course of the game. So it doesn't entirely matter necessarily how good you can get, but at the same time, there's still elements that even with practice to it, you can still kind of take advantage of in order to help yourself out by knowing which crests will be on the dice, so that way you can prioritize how you roll out your dice to try and get yourself out of a sticky situation, or how to try and move your objective forward. It's just so equally fair for everybody that it can promote just a good time of fun for anyone wanting to play or even start out.
Okay, so you would say like the barrier entry is low, but the
Yeah,
skill ceiling is really high.
yeah. If you play with monsters that don't necessarily have effects, because not all monsters in the game do have effects, they're just normal monsters. Even going through that, you can still do well enough, just based on how you roll or
Mhm.
how you decide to play out your strategies.
And how much of that would you say comes down to luck, given that it's dice?
I'd say a large amount can come down to luck into this game, very much so. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that we held a tournament for this game across the people in our Discord. Not to toot my own horn, but I actually did manage to win that tournament myself.
Oh, nice, congrats.
Now, granted that I was able to win this last tournament, we had one previously before it. Actually, myself was eliminated in the first round.
Oh man.
I built a pretty decent team focusing on more lower leveled monsters around like level 1 or level 2 to try and make my summons easier, but I ended up not getting the luckiest in the world on my rolls, and I was not able to get summons out like I wanted to, versus my opponent being able to get a lot of summons out. So they were effectively able to kind of box me in a way. So even though I had a roster of 10 monsters, the space I could fill on the board towards summoning creatures, I was only able to get out at most 6.
You win some, you lose some. The roll the dice
Yeah,
taketh, and the roll of the dice
but I mean that's
taketh
the
away.
kind of thrill you play for in these types of games. Games of strategy for sure, but also the game of chance element definitely adds to the excitement. But I mean, it can work against you, but at the same time, I mean, when games of chance are games of chance. You take what you can get.
So you would say it's like something along the lines of like a poker almost.
Sometimes
So how many people typically enter these tournaments?
the Discord is has a pretty good following right now. Previous tournament that we had 6, but we would have had more, but we ended up having some conflicting schedulings going on with it. The previous one that we had before then ended up having a bit more. We had about a dozen players.
Okay, and like how long would you say games typically take?
They can take probably anywhere from about maybe 30 minutes to like an hour.
That's a
Maybe
reasonable
a little
amount of
more
time.
depending on how you built your team or if the roles just aren't being kind to you, but
Yeah, and that leads me to my third question here. Speaking of like play variety, how much does the individual player get to pick from like their monsters or tiles or dice? Like what's the customization in Dungeon Dice Monsters at a higher level like?
at a higher level, it can get kind of widespread depending on a person's particular play style. Typically, for around half of your monsters or so on the higher end, maybe a little more than half, between like maybe 5, 6, or 7, you might want them to be amongst the lower levels, like level 1 and level 2, because that way it makes it easier to build out your dungeon path because they will be effectively easier to summon. with some of those last slots, you can end up fitting in some maybe a level 3 or 2 of them. They are slightly harder to summon. You can get lucky and get the level 3 summons, but at the same time, there is a rule where if you roll 3 summon crest on all 3 of your dice, it allows you to summon one level higher than the type of monster that you rolled for. You can choose to do. So, say if you roll 3 level 2 summons in your dice roll, you can summon a level 3 monster. So level 3s tend to be a pretty popular one for people to use to try and boost their advantage. And level 4s are definitely the most difficult because you only have a 1 in 6 chance of being able to get it on a die when you roll those dice, and you have to get it for 2 out of 3 of them. So the percentage chance of getting a level 4 is pretty low, but not impossible. They can be pretty game changing sometimes, especially when someone is lucky enough to get multiple of them out.
Okay, so it seems to kind of range just purely based on like level of strength from like your haymakers to your high risk, high rewards. Does monster
Yeah.
abilities have any affliction on this at all?
Yeah, some monsters they can have more simple abilities being towards some can heal for damage, some can they can have an extra attack, or some have abilities where they can straight up destroy another monster on the board completely. And some of these abilities they can be used multiple times throughout the course of a game. So depending on how lucky you can get with your summons, or how you can combine some of these abilities to work together, you can build a pretty strong enough team as well. Like some can double the amounts
Hmm.
of particular crests that you have, or you can convert any of your extra crests that you roll from the remaining crests on the dice into alternate crests as well. You can even go as far to being able to destroy some of your opponent's crests of particular types additionally.
So with all this like intricacy and different ways to play and the more tactile nature, what would you say was the main reason that Dungeon Dice Monsters, for lack of better terms, died?
For one thing, it definitely part a good part of it had to do with marketing. For one thing, the marketing aspect didn't exactly work too great for Dungeon Dice Monsters because of mainly the cost. Because
Hmm.
typically, even for around early 2000s times, they would sell them in little booster packs, and it would be you get one figure in the little booster along with one attributing card for it, and that would run for about $5. And for just one of those pieces to be able to get, it was pretty pricey even back for like 2002. The advanced version of the game runs as a 10 versus 10 piece game. So even with the starter set, which back then was roughly 20 to maybe $30, you additionally have to spend about another $20 on top of that just to have a full team with the starter stuff. Or if you wanted to have expansively more, it could put you into the hundreds of dollars just to try and fill out the rest of the collection.
Yeah, I remember, playing that set with friends and just, you have to decide, all right, who gets which pieces, who gets what, and it was always kind of a little bit of a feral game state from that. And especially when you look
Yeah.
at stuff over in Japan where they had a couple like bigger sets, like starter sets and whatnot.
Yeah, the Japanese version ended up having a starter set that was more expansive than the US one, which I would say is a bit unfortunate for the US side over here. But I mean, it's where the game originated, so we always typically see there being a little bit of favoritism towards some of the marketing that happens over there towards their audience at times. And that's nothing new. But additionally, it did not work as well in Japan versus the United States, strangely enough, because it was favored pretty well enough here in the United States. I wouldn't say it's expansively more popular, but it did fare better with the crowds here in the U.S. because the rules were pretty fundamentally different. Here we have standardized dice. It's just they're all sorted into levels, and if you roll a dice of a certain level and get the summon, then you can summon a monster of that same level. Whereas in the Japanese version, the dice weren't just sorted by level, but they were also sorted by tribe. Now,
Hmm.
monsters are sorted into tribes similar to how monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh have a type, like spellcaster, warrior. In Dungeon Dice Monsters, they had the Dark Tribe, the Dragon Tribe, Warrior, Beast, and a tribe called Invincible, which is basically just kind of the zombie tribe.
So they had
And
specified dice over there.
yeah, they all exclusive. Each tribe had its exclusive dice that were all colored differently. So some would be like red and blue and yellow and green. And you would have, in order to summon a monster, the dice that you rolled had to be of that color oriented over there. But not only that, the dice that they had, similar to how it happened in the anime, would unfold and would be used to build out the dungeon pathway, similar to how they were in when Yuki dueled against Duke Devlin.
Interesting. Yeah, I never knew about that.
Their dice pool would total up to, if I remember correctly, it was 15. And once you managed to get a summon, you would have to take that one of those die that you used to summon it, and it would be used to place onto the board to build out that path. So you would have to have matching to the color of the tribes that you chose for your team, but also you would lose a die to be able to use towards your summons as well as the game progressed.
So it's just way more specific with what you needed over there. Yeah, that sounds like a good call over in the U.S. to make the game a little simpler for people, especially for a game that's targeted towards primarily kids and
Children,
young teens.
typically, yeah.
Yeah. For like my question number 5, like what could have Konami or Upper Deck, whoever's in charge of the production, depending on like where it was, what could they have done to support the game further than just, hey, here's like a starter kit, some booster packs, here's a Game Boy Advance video game? Because I always thought it was a missed opportunity that they never made a home console version of the game with like full 3D, like on the PS2 or GameCube or something.
I mean, if they had done a little better marketing out the game, I believe it could have potentially gotten that way. I could have seen it working better instead of just the booster bags where they get one random monster and a card for it that you could potentially just get multiple of trying to pull them in the blind bags. I mean, if they came out with sets of monsters that you would be able to discern, oh, okay, I just need to get some from that set or that set, and you'd be able to ensure the potential buying base of being able to get some of them versus just making it a blind pull like a booster pack for Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I feel like that might have been the one of the nails in the coffin. Even amongst things like D&D, you're not seeking out figures to be able to use to play for that or for Warhammer and not knowing what you're going to get for trying to play the game. You if you're going to play this board game, you want to make sure you have the pieces that you want to use. And I feel that's kind of where Konami fell off the market there.
Yeah, they didn't release like a more of a, instead of doing just beginner set, like a beginners and a
Like
like
advanced set
yeah, an advance or a two
or
players starter set.
or if not even that, it would just be like additional booster sets coming along that you would be able to get multiple of, and everyone who bought that would all be able to at least get some of those same things. And depending on how they were, if a person didn't like what was in that set, they wouldn't really be missing out, and they could just wait for potentially the next set to come out.
It almost seemed like it disappeared as fast as it arrived over here, right? Because it wasn't around
Mm.
for too terribly long.
Yeah, it lasted longer in Japan because they were ahead of us on the release of their different booster sets. In the original game, they had about 140 monsters that were released for it, coming out from mainly just the original Yu-Gi-Oh! And coming towards about season 2 or 3 in the anime. Like it
Hmm.
finishing lastly with some of the Egyptian gods being Obelisk the Tormentor and Slifer the Sky Dragon. In the community, along with like on Tabletop Simulator and other versions that the game does still seem to exist on, there is a Winged Dragon of Ra that was, at least the data for it was pulled and kind of put out there in the ether for it, but it never got officially released because the game's cancellation.
Oh, interesting.
And
I wonder where they got
so
that from.
there, some brave souls out there managed to get the data, and it's been kind of out there in the ether anymore. Even the people in our server have been able to use it for play. as well. Although for tournament use, when we have those, it has been kind of stuck on the ban list because of how powerful it is.
Oh, so Dungeon Dice Monsters has a ban list,
Yeah, well, it's more of a
a community
like a personal
driven.
ban list that we've come up with. At times, they do change depending on what's sitting on there, and if something might have been on there for too long, and we wanted to see play, we'll remove some things and then add others.
What's considered to be ban worthy? Something that's high power, low die roll, or something that's like
The amount of dice that you roll every single turn is one thing. Monsters that can steal monsters from your opponents for your own personal use. Some things that just have outright destruction effects that could be considered too strong. Most effects in the game, they are tied to a particular type of crest. Aside from the summons, there are attack, defense, movement, magic, and trap crests. Most abilities are more geared towards magic, but in the case of Ra, for example, the reason it's on the ban list is you can, for all the other crests that I named that aren't summoned, you typically keep track of them in the physical version of the game using an abacus, and you're able to have 10 of each of those crests: attack, defense, movement, magic, and trap, to be able to store up for use later as your turns are progressing when you roll your dice. Normally, to activate an ability, one being I will say called Cannon Soldier, a pretty famous monster from Yu-Gi-Oh, would be you use 3 Magic Crest and you can sacrifice one of your monsters. In turn, you can destroy any one monster that your opponent controls, and that's the effect that it has in Dungeon Dice Monsters. Whereas the Winged Dragon of Ra, by just spending any 10 crests that you have, reducing your life points from to 1, where your life points sit at a maximum of 3 in this game. By
mhm,
doing that, you can destroy all monsters that your opponent currently controls in the dungeon.
that's strong.
Yes, it is it can be a risk by reducing your life points like that, but it is a very powerful ability to use in the game.
Were there any additional unreleased monsters, or was it just Raw?
Raw so far is the only one we're really in the know about. Although there are plenty of monsters that did at least come out in Japan that did not come out here in America. Roughly, the American version of the game got, I think, somewhere between like 80 to maybe 100 of them, whereas Japan got 140 or 141.
Have there been any like conspiracy theories on people speculating on like what was going to be added to the game?
For sure, there are definitely speculations on what might have been added. Like, I mean, we ended up getting Yugi's Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Valkyrie and the Magna Warriors in some of the later sets in the Japanese that didn't come out in America near the end of Dungeon Dice Monsters' lifetime. So there was definite speculation on, oh, we might get like X Head Cannon, Y Dragon Head, and Z Metal Tank to do XYZ
Hmm.
Dragon Cannon at some point with some more of Kaiba's monsters and potentially like Maximilian Pegasus's Toon monsters. There were endless possibilities to go forward with it because it was drawing from Yukio as the source material.
Yeah, it's kind of wild when you think about had Dungeon Dice Monsters gotten to that point where it was had more representation from the manga and anime, just how much more popular or more people would at least be looking at it had it done more of that type of idea. So I was going to go to my question number 6 here, which what would you say are some Dungeon Dice Monsters misconceptions for those people that may think it's one thing when it might be something else?
Some people might think that it might be a little harder because it's this turn-based tabletop game that's not drawing cards and building out like a long, extensive strategy in your head and everything to be able to utilize versus it's a bit slower paced. So people typically find those slower paced type of games for the most part to be a little more challenging because they could be more overwhelmed because of a person's just innate skill at the game particularly. But a lot of it is also just luck based too. So it does a bit of a tank to that skill based need to play the game. So I mean, even when you're brand new to the game, if you just end up being able to get lucky during some of your rolls too, because I mean, luck is a major element to the game, you can end up still winning. And overall, even if you don't win, I still find it to be a very fun game. It's just a very challenging experience. It can go back and forth between players all the time. I mean, you can be overwhelming at one point and then find yourself in dire straits, but then start finding yourself having the advanced lead again. It can turn so many ways throughout the course of a game at times, and it just makes it that much more fun.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Dungeon Dice Dimension. I believe that's their YouTube channel as well. That
Yes.
has their own like seasons that they'll upload of like full IRL games. I find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, for any players that might be considering to play the game, the Dungeon Dice Dimension on YouTube. That's the name of the channel, run by some good friends of mine. Samurai Snoop, he's the main guy on our Discord. He's also a good acquaintance I have throughout my time with doing Dungeon Dice Monsters. He runs a very good channel. Him and his friend do great matches. They even have done tutorial videos of how to play the game as well. And by just watching some of them, it's very educational to learning how to play the game. And they do it in a pretty, I'd say, easy enough fashion, and they voice out how they're going to be doing their commands and activating effects. And when they're doing it, they discuss through the process of doing everything very well. So anyone that wants to learn the game, that's a definitely a good source of how to pick up on things.
Yeah, and that leads me to my seventh question here: is that what would you say is the community as a whole doing to revive the game?
One thing is definitely just trying to make up some content to put more of the word out there. Then there are also others like myself, for one thing. I actually make Dungeon Dice Monster cards based on many Yu-Gi-Oh cards and add on to the roster of things that exist for the game. I've also taken existing monsters from the game and edited them as well to give them effects to make them a bit better for use in the game.
And I assume these are just kind of things you play with like friends, not so much doing like, let's say, like alternate formats with other people of the community.
Well, actually, I've played not only with friends, but I've also set up on taken my creations. I've uploaded them onto a mod I've created for on Tabletop Simulator, mainly based off of another pre-existing mod from a very intelligent person who added a lot of the work into Tabletop Simulator. With them as a layout, I was able to add a lot of my custom creations onto there, expanding it from about 140 to almost 400.
Oh wow, is this a lot of relatively basic ideas, or is this like really experimenting with different concepts and ways to play the game?
I mean, there are a few new concepts geared towards like newer types of abilities added into, but I've it's still been kept into a basic enough format that it would be easy enough to understand and utilize for any new players to the game as well. That would just like a more diverse pool of monsters to be able to pick from.
What have been some of your favorite additions you've added?
Some of my favorite additions.
Your favorite monsters or classes?
I've done good work with adding monsters like Maximilian Pegasus's Toon monsters like Toon World, Blue Eyes Toon Dragon, Toon Dark Magician, Toon Summon Skull. I've done the Elemental Heroes and Neos. I've done the Sacred Beasts. I've done Cyber Dragons, XYZ Dragon Cannon, a lot of monsters from Seto Kaiba and Joey Wheeler, Merrick, Bakura.
Okay,
I've done most of the bigger, more popular types of monsters going up through the GX era of Yu-Gi-Oh! I have planned for the 5Ds era with monsters like Stardust Dragon and Red Dragon Archfiend, but I haven't gotten to work on those just yet.
I was gonna ask about that. That'd be certainly a wild thing for Dungeon Dice monsters, right? Like that's a content of a video right there. Oh, I added synchros to Dungeon Dice.
Now, granted, though, I not necessarily synchros, but I have also been theory crafting a way to implement spells and traps into the game, along with adding fusion monsters into the game as well.
Oh, interesting. Hear a little
Once
bit.
I get more of those down packed and get to work on actually creating those card images, they'll definitely end up being added to the mod on Tabletop Simulator.
Excellent. I mean, that basically answered my my next question, which was, what would you add to Dungeon Dice Monster? I think you kind of, answer that with like the spell and traps and potentially summoning mechanics. It sounded like with fusions and spells and traps kind
Yeah,
of work as they were, right? You use certain dice to activate something that affects the field, or you use monsters on the field to create something. Is that what I'm getting at?
yeah. Typically, yeah, just being able to use dice to be able to play either a spell or a trap card, and fusion would be pretty simple enough as itself. You just have monsters out to be able to use and to be able to combine and play a specialized fusion monster. That would be definitely more powerful than the monsters you use to summon it, but it would
Mhm.
also be at the cost of milling down your forces to play something bigger.
Now, has there been anything you've tried to add to the game that didn't really work out, whether it was a certain ability or converting a Yu-Gi-Oh card to a DDM style?
I mean, yeah, like going forward towards trying to create more versions of things for the game, I more typically started out from a viewpoint of wanting to basically take existing Yu-Gi-Oh monsters and convert their abilities to be something almost completely similar to what you see in the Yu-Gi-Oh game for Dungeon Dice monsters, but
Mhm.
considering long lines of text and the complexity or even overall just power of the abilities and a lot of the better ones being so similar at times, it just didn't entirely work out. So I just kind of had to spitball brand new types of effects that monsters could use, and then it'd just be its own thing for Dungeon Dice monsters.
Yeah, because I can only imagine adding cards and trying to make like how they work in the TCG, like a rescue rabbit or a crystal beast, or God forbid, an access
Oh, I
code
did actually
talker.
do Crystal Beasts
Oh,
for
really?
this game. Yeah. They are a bit similar to how they worked in TCG. It's just when they are destroyed, they will leave this token that you can place in empty zones on the board. And basically, they wouldn't really be able to do a whole lot, but if you were lucky enough to be able to summon Rainbow Dragon's ability would be able to power up based on how many of those tokens are sitting around on the board. Similar to the TCG, that was one thing I was able to make happen. That was at least similar to Yu-Gi-Oh. That wasn't too broken,
Okay.
which was mainly my idea going forward. Because some things in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game can be so broken at times that it's
Mhm.
kind of like overpowered or unfair. And that's definitely not wanted the direction I wanted to take with Dungeon Dice Monsters. I wanted to keep it just fair enough to not break everything and make a whole lot of cards just unfair that you just got to make them banned for your own personal use or for any potential fun personal tournament type use.
I would imagine that can be a little tough to test too, just given how random the dice are, because that sort of creates its own inherent buffer, right?
Yeah. But at the same time, I've also taken some initiatives towards, in a way, giving more abilities to monsters, but also like powering them down in a way as to like reducing costs for them. So that way they could still be used, but not be abused. So that way players are still being able to utilize the monsters that they have and like they want to a fair degree.
So I know you talked about tabletop simulator. This leads me to question number 9, is that how can people play the game at home? Like if they wanted to play the game physically, like on a table, because I know it's rather tough to find a lot of these items from years ago, because a lot of the prices have gone way up. A lot of the Japanese ones, you can't quite read the cards. How do people sort of circumvent that?
I mean, there are other people that have made efforts to try and make other cards, like myself. I know it can be a lot more expensive to find a lot of the original stuff. I've been trying to get to a point myself to maybe start putting out some of my own stuff to be able to sell at a more reasonable price. But there are also others, like this one Discord group that I am a part of called Vindicated Entertainment. and they have made their own contributions towards the Dungeon Dice Monster game. It's not as expansive as the work that I've done with mine, but they still have added a fairly good amount to the game themselves. And they do have it like for free to be able to download and print and cut out and be able to play on your own.
And that's also for the pieces or just the cards?
Yeah, yeah, they'd be like cut out stand up pieces that you would be able to use.
I've heard of people discuss like 3D printing in regards to Dungeon Dice Monsters.
Yeah, 3D printing, it can work depending on the quality of printer you have, but you definitely need an expensive one because there are some sources with links out there to 3D print diagrams for the pieces, but they can be kind of flimsy at times.
So it's probably better just go
Me
the cheap and reasonable route.
Me personally, because I faced getting them as well being an issue because of how costly they could be on places like eBay because how hard and rare they are to find. It started as a personal project, just creating cards for me to be able to use. And I basically ended up making little tokens to be able to use in place of the figures. So instead of just a stand-up figure, it was more of like a one of those little storage coin holders, and then I just put an image of the monster in there to be able to use in place as well. That's one creative replacement I thought of.
I mean, that's pretty fun that there's different ways to go about this, and if people have like that creative eye, then they can really kind of work their own magic into it.
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge trying to come across all of this. A lot of time and a lot of dedication to try and be able to add on life to this game that has been mostly unexistent for most people for all this time. But I mean, there's still people out there that love the game. And as long as people out there play it, appreciate it, I mean, it can't truly ever die. And it still has some potential to have some kind of life breed.
Oh, absolutely. Would you say there's any like holy grail pieces you're looking for?
I mean, some of the most popular pieces out there, any of the original Egyptian gods, for one thing, because like Slifer and Obelisk, they had these prismatic secret rare looking cards for their original releases that came into Japanese, and they are you can find it. It's very very expensive. We're talking in the thousands of dollars here, especially if they're in good condition. Either that or just very hard to find.
I have to keep a lookout at my flea markets for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you could find that at a flea market, I'd definitely say grab it.
If I ever see any Dungeon Dice monsters, honestly, I probably would grab it if it's a reasonable price. Because I mean, I just have the starter box, so I'm not in any condition to really play the game.
I mean, even with the starter, you can always play at the beginner stage version of the game where you just do 5v5 against another player if they have some pieces as well. It's
Mhm.
on a smaller format of the game board that every starter set comes with, the smaller square inside the main board. But I mean, it can still be fun.
Yeah,
I
I'll have
played
to.
plenty of games on the
Mhm.
smaller board before and had a blast.
Yeah, I'll have to bust it out one of these days. Like I'm sure I'm gonna play the GBA game on a stream at some point in the future. Don't know when, but so this leads me to my 10th question, the ultimate question, the last question here. What is Yu-Gi-Oh to you?
Yukio, definitely one of the greatest pastimes I can think of when I reflect on growing up. It's always been this source of fun and entertainment that's been there for me ever since I was young. That added this sense of euphoria and fun to life. It just added towards more imagination and wonderment. It was so fun playing the game with friends growing up. Collecting the cards is always such a thrill. Opening the booster packs, getting that special card out of the pack,
Hmm.
and being so happy and elated because you were able to pull it is going to always be such a wellspring of happy memories for me. Even though with the future of the game having gotten a little more complex over time and a little more harder to play competitively, I will still always look on the game as one of those things that will be one of the highlights of my youth.
That's great. Again, thank you for stopping by. You have any shout outs you'd like to give?
Look at the Dungeon Dice Dimension on YouTube. They definitely have done great work. Have great videos that show the how to play the game. Great content to watch on how to play Dungeon Dice Monsters. The Dungeon Dice Dimension Discord, it's always open to new people and new ideas, and we'd love to be able to get more people together to put on some more tournaments in the future as well online. Hey, if you liked anything I had to say about the game, give me a follow on Instagram at DDM Industrial Illusions.
All right. Thank you for coming on, CJ. It was a pleasure talking to you.
All right, thank you for having me. It was great.